The sound of an approaching train echoed through the cold Montana air, growing louder with each passing second. Its metal wheels screeched against the tracks as the ground vibrated beneath it. On the tracks ahead, a mother bear was chained, her once mighty body now weak and helpless. Her cubs, small and fragile, huddled close, their trembling forms offering what little comfort they could. The sight was heartbreaking. Their only refuge now was each other. But even that was fleeting as the train loomed ever closer. The mother bear, named Briara, closed her eyes, preparing for the end. She had been through so much: captivity, abuse, starvation. The chains that bound her were a cruel reminder of her torment. And now, with the sound of the train growing deafening, there was nothing left to do but accept the inevitable. But just as the thunderous roar of the train reached its peak, a sudden screech of tires cut through the air. It wasn't the train, it was a truck, barreling to a stop with urgency. A group of figures rushed out, their movements frantic and swift, rushing toward the helpless bear and her cubs. Levi Hunter, the leader of the group, felt his pulse quicken. His eyes locked onto Briara, her powerful form reduced to nothing more than a victim of cruelty. His heart clenched at the sight. Beside him, his daughter, Celine, gripped a flashlight so tightly her knuckles turned white. "Dad," she whispered, her voice shaky. "Can we save her?" Levi's jaw tightened as he glanced at Celine. "We're going to try," he replied, his tone firm but filled with uncertainty. He wasn't sure how they would do it, but they had no other choice. The rescue was frantic and dangerous. Briara's chains were thick and rusted, stubborn against every pull. The train's approaching sound was deafening now, the vibration so intense that the ground seemed to shake beneath them. The group worked with frantic precision, using bolt cutters to break through the chains. Each second counted, and the tension was suffocating. Finally, with one last powerful snap, the chains were broken. Briara was free, but her body was weak, her fur matted with dirt and blood. Her cubs, whose names were Quill, Ember, and the smallest, Pippa, huddled beside her, their wide eyes filled with fear, but a flicker of trust in their mother's presence. Celine quickly helped guide them into the back of the truck, the cubs looking up at her with confused eyes. The truck's engine roared to life as they sped away, the train's distant horn still echoing in the background, now a mere memory. The journey back to their sanctuary was filled with an overwhelming mix of emotions. Willowhaven, the sanctuary Levi had built from the ground up, was a sanctuary for creatures like Briara and her cubs. What began as a small refuge for injured animals had blossomed into a thriving facility, dedicated to rescuing and rehabilitating wildlife in need. As they arrived, the team wasted no time tending to Briara's wounds. Dr. Soren Hale, the sanctuary's lead veterinarian, examined her with careful hands. "She's a survivor," Soren said, gently probing the deep scratches and bruises on Briara's legs. "But her road to recovery is going to be a long one." The cubs fared a little better, though they were still wary of the humans around them. Celine, who had always had a soft spot for animals, began spending more time near their enclosure. She would sit quietly, sketching in her notebook as the cubs explored their new home. Pippa, the smallest of the three, was the first to venture close to Celine. She sat near the fence, her bright eyes curious as she watched Celine's gentle movements. "Looks like you've made a friend," Levi remarked one afternoon, seeing how Pippa had taken to Celine's presence. Celine smiled, her heart swelling with warmth. "She's not afraid anymore. That's a good sign, right?" Levi nodded, a soft chuckle escaping his lips. "That's progress, definitely." As weeks turned into months, Briara's wounds slowly healed, and her strength began to return. Her once dull fur started to shine, and the way she moved, though still slow and cautious, was a reminder of her natural grace. The cubs, too, began to regain their confidence. They grew bolder, their playful energy returning as they explored their enclosure. It wasn't easy, but the team at Willowhaven was determined to give them the best chance at survival. Celine wasn't the only one transformed by the bear's presence. The sanctuary's volunteers, mostly teens who had their own struggles and challenges, found themselves growing in ways they hadn't expected. Iris, a quiet but creative girl, began to craft enrichment tools for the animals, building complex puzzles and hidden treats for them to find. Finn, once a shy and reserved boy, found his voice in woodworking, constructing climbing platforms and shelters for the animals. Callum, who was always lost in thought, took on the responsibility of documenting Briara's rehabilitation, making sure every detail of her recovery was noted. The day Briara and her cubs were ready to leave the sanctuary was approaching, but it wasn't an easy thought for anyone involved. "They're nearly there," Dr. Hale said one evening as he watched Briara teach her cubs how to forage. "She's come so far, and so have you all." The teens, in their own way, understood the significance of this moment. "We should do something special," Iris suggested one evening, her voice filled with emotion. "We need to honor her journey and everything she's taught us." The idea of a ceremony took root, and in the days that followed, the sanctuary was alive with preparations. Selena spent hours working on a series of illustrations that told the story of Briara's journey, from the tracks to the safety of Willowhaven. Finn, Iris, and Callum worked together to build a feeding station at the release site. Each volunteer contributed something meaningful to the ceremony, their efforts a reflection of how far they had come alongside the bears. The day of Briara's release arrived with clear skies and the scent of fresh spring air. The team set out for the remote valley where they would release her and her cubs. The valley was untouched, wild and beautiful, with a river running through it and the woods teeming with life. It was the perfect place for Briara and her cubs to start anew. When they opened the trailer, Briara hesitated for a moment before stepping out into the wild. The morning sunlight bathed her in warmth, and she lifted her nose to the air, scenting the freedom around her. One by one, her cubs followed her, their movements hesitant at first, but gradually growing bolder. They explored their new surroundings with a sense of wonder, as if they were discovering the world anew. Levi and Selene watched quietly, their hearts full. It had been a long and difficult journey, but they had done it. Briara and her cubs were finally free. "Look at them," Selena whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "They're free." Levi placed a hand on her shoulder, his voice soft. "They're not the only ones who've healed." Selena glanced at him, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It's not goodbye, is it?" Levi smiled, a sense of peace settling over him. "Number? It's just the beginning." As the team made their way back to Willowhaven, the sun began to rise higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the land. Briara and her cubs, free and thriving, were no longer just a story of rescue. They were a reminder that healing was possible, no matter how broken things seemed, and that the light of hope could always shine through, even in the darkest of moments.